I never thought the people who were supposed to love me most would look me in the eye and offer me charity like I was a stranger on the street. The moment Veronica Reynolds leaned across that white tablecloth, her manicured fingers brushing the stem of her wine glass, and said in that syrupy voice, "We'd be happy to give you a little something every month, dear. Say $800 so you don't have to struggle." I felt my entire world tilt. The words landed soft, like velvet over a blade, and something inside my chest cracked open, not with rage, but with a grief so deep I almost couldn't breathe. If you've ever been reduced to nothing by the people you raised your child to respect, keep listening. My name is Vivian Harper. I am 59, and for the last 24 years, I've been the Chief Operating Officer of Apex Global Solutions, a logistics firm headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. My office sits on the 32nd floor of the Truist Center. I sign contracts worth 9 figures before most people finish their first cup of coffee. But to my son Dylan and his wife Madison, I'm just mom who lives quietly in that little condo off Providence Road. They've never asked to see the view from my real office. They never needed to. I wanted Dylan to grow up knowing that money is a tool, not a personality. I wanted him to see that peace can live in a 2-bedroom apartment and that love doesn't need marble floors to echo. 3 years ago, he married Madison Whitlock, daughter of old Carolina tobacco money that somehow survived the lawsuits and turned itself into real estate empires. Madison is beautiful the way magazines are beautiful, perfectly lit, perfectly filtered. When Dylan started dating her, I watched him change haircuts, watches, even the way he laughed. His shoulders lifted higher, like he was trying to grow into a version of himself that fit beside her. I told myself love does that to people. I told myself a lot of things. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd feel this small ache, like I was already losing him to a world that measured worth in square footage and zip codes. Then came the phone call on a Thursday in October. I remember the exact moment. I was standing at the kitchen counter slicing an apple, the knife catching the overhead light, when my phone buzzed against the granite. "Mom," Dylan said, voice low, almost hushed, like he was asking me to keep a secret. "Madison's parents are flying in from Kiowa Island this weekend. They want to take us all to dinner at the Fig Tree on Saturday night. It's important to Madison that everyone gets along." The knife stilled in my hand. I heard what he didn't say. "Please don't embarrass me." I set the apple down, wiped my fingers on a dish towel, and asked, "Do they know what I do for a living?" A pause long enough to hurt, long enough for the silence to crawl under my skin. "I told them you're retired from administrative work and that you like to keep things simple." Simple. The words sat in my mouth like a stone, cold, heavy, impossible to swallow. That night, I stood in front of my closet longer than I cared to admit. My fingers drifted past the rows of Brioni and Escada, the silk linings whispering like old friends, until they landed on a plain black dress I bought at Belk 12 years ago for a funeral. I held it up, and the fabric felt thin, honest, worn soft from too many washings. I pulled my hair into a low knot, skipped the diamonds, and fastened the small gold cross I've worn since the day Dylan was baptized. His tiny fingers had curled around it while the priest poured water over his head. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection looked back with tired eyes and gray threading through my hair. I saw exactly what they expected to see: a tired older woman who had never quite made it. And for one terrifying second, I wondered if maybe they were right. Saturday came in with a cold drizzle that made the uptown streets shine like obsidian. The air smelled like wet leaves and exhaust. I took an Uber so no one would notice the absence of a luxury car. I watched the windshield wipers sweep back and forth, like they were trying to erase something that couldn't be wiped away. The fig tree glowed warm behind its ivy-covered walls, candles flickering in every window like it was proud of how much everything cost. The scent of rosemary and wood smoke drifted out when the door opened. My stomach tightened.
Dylan was waiting under the awning in a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. When he saw me, his shoulders dropped a fraction. Relief or disappointment, I couldn't tell. The rain dotted his hair with tiny diamonds. "Mom, you look nice," he said, kissing the air beside my cheek so he wouldn't smear Madison's lipstick on me. His cologne was new, something sharp and expensive that didn't smell like my son at all. Madison herself wore emerald silk that caught the candlelight and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Mrs. Harper, we're so happy you could join us." Her perfume floated between us, something French and cold. Her parents, Jeffrey and Veronica Whitlock, arrived minutes later, smelling of private jet leather and old money. Veronica's pearls were the size of mothballs and gleamed against her throat like tiny moons. Jeffrey's cufflinks were actual gold nuggets from a mine he still owned in Montana. He shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. We sat. The waiter poured water no one asked for. The clink of crystal and silverware felt loud in my ears. Conversation floated above my head like expensive balloons. St. Barth's in February, the new yacht club membership, the beach house renovation that had ballooned to $1.8 million because Italian marble apparently is sentient and changes its mind. I felt the weight of every gaze when the talk finally turned to me. "So, Vivian," Veronica began, tilting her head with that practiced sympathy, "Dylan says you live alone in a condominium?" "Yes, 2 bedrooms, paid off in 2014. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "That must be such a relief," she cooed, swirling her wine so the legs crawled slowly down the glass. "Retirement can be so hard on a fixed income. Tell me, do you manage all right with groceries and things?" I felt Dylan's foot nudge mine under the table. Warning or apology, I wasn't sure. The linen tablecloth suddenly felt too hot against my knees. I answered calmly, "I do just fine, thank you." Jeffrey leaned in, voice rich with practiced benevolence. "We like to help family, Vivian. Madison and Dylan shouldn't have to worry about you struggling. We could easily set something up. Maybe $800 a month deposited directly. It's nothing to us." $800. The exact amount I spent on coffee beans in a slow month. The exact amount I once spent on Dylan's first bike with training wheels. Veronica reached across and patted my hand like I was a shelter dog. Her rings were cold against my skin. "It would take such a weight off everyone's mind, dear." I looked at my son. His eyes were fixed on the bread plate, jaw tight. The muscle ticking the way it did when he was 8 and trying not to cry in the principal's office. Something inside me went very still. The restaurant noise faded to a dull roar in my ears. I felt the years collapse into that single moment. Every overtime shift, every missed school play, every time I chose to be the parent who provided instead of the one who performed. I smiled the way I smile in boardrooms right before I fire someone. "That's extraordinarily generous." My voice was soft, almost kind. "May I ask, how much did you gift the kids for the down payment on the house in Myers Park?" Veronica blinked, surprised I could form a follow-up question. $425,000, and another $80 for the wedding." "Why?" I reached into my purse with fingers that didn't tremble and took out my phone. I opened the banking app, turned the screen so the table could see the balance, 7 figures liquid, not counting retirement accounts, and laid the phone face up beside my plate, like it was the dessert menu. $800, I said quietly, is roughly what I spend on bottled water for the executive team every month. I'm the COO of Apex Global Solutions. Last year, I personally closed a merger worth $1.4 billion. But please, tell me more about how I struggle. The candles seemed to freeze mid-flicker. The air itself felt thick, like the room had stopped breathing. Madison's mouth opened, then closed with a soft click of teeth. Jeffrey's tan faded 2 shades. Veronica's pearls suddenly looked cheap against the flush crawling up her neck like spilled wine. Dylan whispered, "Mom." His voice cracked on the single word. I met his eyes, and for the first time that night, I let him see everything. The exhaustion, the love, the fierce pride I'd carried alone for years. "You didn't lie to them, sweetheart. You just forgot who paid for every single one of your clarinet lessons, every college application fee, every emergency room visit when you thought skateboards were a personality." My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. I needed him to feel it. I signaled the waiter, slid my black Amex across the leather folder, and said, "Dinner's on me tonight. Consider it my treat for the family who wanted to keep me comfortable." Then I stood, smoothed the 12-year-old dress that suddenly felt like armor, and walked out into the rain without looking back. The cold air felt like baptism. It soaked through the thin fabric instantly, but I didn't care. The city smelled clean, like wet pavement and possibility. I was halfway down the block, heels clicking against the wet sidewalk, when I heard footsteps splashing behind me. Dylan caught my arm, breathing hard. "Mom, wait, please." I turned. Rain streaked his face, or maybe those were tears. Streetlights blurred into halos around his head. He said, "I didn't know they were going to do that. I swear, I didn't." "But you weren't surprised, were you?" I asked softly. The rain drummed on the awning above us, steady and forgiving. He looked down at the wet pavement, shoulders curling inward. "I should have told them the truth. I was ashamed of how proud you've always been of living quietly. I thought it would be easier if they just underestimated you." Easier. There was that word again. It tasted like rust in my mouth. I reached up and touched his cheek, the way I did when he had fever dreams at 7 years old. His skin was cold from the rain. "Baby, the easiest thing in the world is to let people think you're small. The hard thing is remembering you never were." He started crying then, really crying, the way he did when he was 6 and lost his first tooth and was terrified the tooth fairy wouldn't find our apartment. His whole body shook with it. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, over and over until the words lost shape. "I know," I whispered, pulling him close. His expensive suit soaked my old dress, but I held him anyway. "Come home with me tonight, just you. We'll talk." He nodded against my shoulder like a little boy. We took a cab to my little condo. The driver glanced at us in the rearview mirror but said nothing. When the elevator opened directly into the penthouse, Dylan stopped dead in the doorway. The city stretched out below us like spilled jewels. The kitchen alone was bigger than the first floor of the house he grew up in, all sleek lines and warm light. He walked slowly to the window, hands in his pockets, staring out like he was seeing me for the first time. "You never brought me here. I brought you to the home where you learned values. This is just where I sleep." He turned, eyes red and ancient. I forgot the difference. We sat on the couch and talked until 3 a.m, until the rain slowed to a whisper against the glass. I told him about the nights I worked until dawn so he could go to music camp, about the promotion I turned down because it would have moved us to Singapore when he was 15, about every single time I chose him over everything else, and how sometimes, in the quiet, I wondered if he even noticed. When he finally fell asleep on the couch with the same Afghan I used to tuck around him at 8 years old, I stood at the window and watched the rain wash Charlotte clean. The city lights trembled on the wet streets below, and, for the first time in years, I let myself cry, just a little, just enough to make room for what came next. 2 days later, Madison showed up at my office unannounced. She looked different. No designer armor, hair in a simple ponytail, eyes puffy like she hadn't slept. The Charlotte skyline behind her looked almost gentle in the afternoon light. She carried a small paper bag from Ameli's bakery that smelled like butter and regret. "I brought croissants," she said, voice small, barely above the hum of the air conditioning. "I wasn't sure what else to do." I let her in, closed the door with a soft click, and waited. The silence stretched, thick and necessary. She stood in the middle of the Persian rug and started crying. Quiet, shoulders shaking, the kind of tears that come from somewhere deeper than pride. "I rehearsed a speech the whole way here, and now I can't remember any of it." "Then don't give me a speech," I said gently. "Tell me the truth." She took a shaky breath that sounded like surrender. "I grew up being told that money is safety, that if you have enough of it, no one can ever hurt you. When Dylan said his mom lived simply, I thought it meant you were one layoff away from disaster. I wanted to fix it before you became my problem." Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't flinch. "And now?" "Now I see I was the disaster," she whispered, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. "I'm so sorry, Vivian. I treated you like someone broken because I was terrified of ever being broken myself." She opened the paper bag with trembling fingers, pulled out a single almond croissant, still warm, and set it on my desk like an offering. The smell filled the room, sweet, fragile, human. "I quit the Junior League committee, and I told my mother if she ever speaks to you like that again, she won't see our children." I hadn't known I was holding my breath until it left me all at once, warm against the cool office air. "Children?" I asked, barely trusting my voice. She touched her stomach, barely showing under the loose sweater, and nodded. "We just found out, 12 weeks. Something fierce and tender bloomed in my chest, like sunrise after the longest night. I walked around the desk and hugged her, really hugged her, until her breathing slowed and the shaking stopped. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," I said against her hair that smelled like drugstore shampoo instead of salon mist. "But only if you remember that safety isn't something you buy. It's something you build, one honest day at a time." She laughed for tears, the sound wobbly and real. "Will you teach me?" "Every single Sunday," I promised, pulling back to look at her. "Bring Dylan, bring the ultrasound pictures, bring your appetite. We'll start with learning how to make cornbread without a mix, and how to apologize when you burn it." That was 18 months ago.
These days, my condo doesn't feel quiet anymore. It's filled with the sound of a toddler learning to say gamma in a sticky southern drawl, and the smell of Sunday gravy that simmers for hours while little hands steal pieces of garlic bread. Madison wears my old aprons tied twice around her waist now, flour on her cheeks, asking questions like she's afraid the answers might disappear if she doesn't grab them fast enough. Dylan sold the Myers Park house none of us liked anyway, the one with the cold marble floors that echoed too much, and bought a place 10 minutes from me, with a porch big enough for rocking chairs and a yard just right for bare feet and summer grass. Small enough that they still need Sunday dinner at Gamma's to feel like a family. Last week, Veronica sent an envelope, thick cream paper, that probably cost more than most people's light bill. Inside was a check for $800 and a note in perfect calligraphy that read, "For whatever you need, with deepest apologies." I sat at my kitchen table, morning light spilling across the same spot where I once sliced that apple, and I endorsed the check over to the women's shelter downtown. I mailed it back with a yellow post-it that said, "They need it more than I do. Love, Vivian." Some lessons only stick when they cost something.
I still work because I love it, not because I need the money. But I leave the corner office at 5 sharp every Friday so I can be home when the screen door slams and little feet come running, shouting, "Gamma!" like it's the best word in the world. The black dress from Belk hangs in the back of my closet now, wrapped in plastic, like a memory I'm not ready to let go. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the baby is napping, I take it out just to feel the fabric between my fingers. To remember the night the rain washed everything clean and I walked out taller than I walked in. Because dignity isn't something you prove to people who never saw you in the first place. Dignity is what's left when the rain stops and you're still standing, head high, heart open, ready for whatever comes next. If you've ever been counted out by the very people who should have counted on you, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if my story meant something to you tonight, subscribe to the channel. There are more truths waiting, and I'd love to share them with you. Money fades. Dignity doesn't.